Before I get started, next Sunday morning we'll have our business meeting, but we will have it at right before Sunday school. Mary has to go to work, be at work by 2 o'clock, and by the time we have church and get done with church, it most of the time makes her late. Next week we'll vote on officers and teachers in the vestibule back there. There's a list like this. A lot of you, your name is on it. Our picking pool is not that great. We're a small church, so most time, like they say, if you get a job, you get it for life. So we try to be accommodating that way. So that way you don't have to worry about what you're going to do. If your name's on it, next Sunday we will vote and you'll stay there. But if you want to change, or if you're not on the list, you sign up where you want to be and we'll vote you in. So that's how that works. And I want to welcome our visitors this morning. So as we get started. All right, so if you have your Bibles, turn to John, the first chapter. First chapter of John, we'll be looking at verses 40 to 42. But the question this morning that we are going to look at, what's your story? You know, each and every one of us has come from somewhere. There's a place that we've started. There has been a journey of life to get us to here where we're at in this very moment. You just look at your past, and I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want to look at my past. You just don't know where I've been. But you don't understand. It is where you've been, all of your experiences, everything that's happened in your life to bring you to this moment right here. We all have a story. That's what we're looking at this morning, your story. John, first chapter, the 40th verse, the 42nd, it tells us these words. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated to Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Now when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated to stone. This morning we are going to look, as I said, your story. Like I said, there's several different stories I'm going to share with you this morning. But as I said, you know, we all have a purpose. God created us to do great things. This morning we're going to look at Andrew. Now, if you just look at what we read right there, they were following John the Baptist, and Andrew saw Jesus. And Andrew went to Jesus, and then the first thing Andrew did was went back for his brother. And it's an amazing thing because you just look at that 42nd verse. It says that he brought him to Jesus. Now, Jesus didn't say, "Andrew, that's a job well done. Andrew, you did just exactly what you're supposed to do." He didn't say that. But look at what he said was this. He said, now as Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which translates stone. So, you know, Andrew was kind of overlooked at that moment as Jesus looked at Peter. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But what's your story? There's a story by the name of Eva Edel. E-D-L is her last name. Her daring escape from communism death camp of Yugoslavia in the wake of World War II. Eva was only 6 when the Nazis invaded. A coup against Yugoslavia's king caused a violent civil war to erupt, emasculating Yugoslavia's defense, even as the powerful Nazi war machine began to drop bombs on them. The Soviets kidnapped her mother to dig trenches for the war effort. With her protector and hero gone, fear began to torment Eva's soul. Fear of the consequences of her own sin, fear of Judgment Day. Now, her 2 older siblings were led by bayonet to a forced labor camp run by the brutal local communists. Oma, which is Eva's grandmother, and Eva were put on a train bound for the concentration camp. While the free world was celebrating victory over Nazi Germany and nuclear bombs had elevated America's power to the pinnacle of the world, Eva and her people were targeted for elimination. They were putting them in these concentration camps in order to starve them to death. Unlike the Nazi concentration camps, the communist concentration camps did not shut down when the war ended. and they were just getting started. Ava had miraculously rescued from a genocide of her people and immigrated to Australia, and ultimately to the United States, where she encountered another genocide behind the doors of death camps, also propped up by godless laws and funded by the government. Ava's story, it's a great story to read it. I'm just hitting highlights of it. What Ava done after she escaped that concentration camp where they put her there to starve, she went to Australia, and then she came to the United States. Well, once she came to the United States, Ava began being involved in the pro-life movement. And that's what she's talking about by the death camps of the United States. Over 1 million unborn babies alive by every standard of medical science were being killed in American death camps. Now, here is where Ava's story gets interesting. Ava is now 89 years old. 89-year-old Ava, a survivor of Nazi invasion in a communist concentration camp, was recently arrested by the Department of Justice for praying and blocking access to abortion clinics in Michigan and Tennessee. She now faces 10 years in prison for violating the FACE Act. But before her sentencing, she spoke about how we got here in the first place. How did people become so accepting of abortion? Ava goes on to say, I'm prepared to die in there. What she says about prison, and I'm not afraid. Your story. We are put here for a purpose. We were put here to make a difference in people's lives. We think about Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Jesus referred to James and John as sons of thunder. It didn't take much to tick them off. Somebody didn't want to hear the gospel. They just simply tell Jesus, call down the fire of heaven and just warm them up a little bit. That will change their mind. You know, Peter, impetuous, hasty, bold, oftentimes proud, most of the times, many times, responded without Christ's permission. But then the character we're looking at is just one rather insignificant. He's one that the Bible teaches touched one, but the one he touched thousands. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard John and followed him. He first found his own brother Simon and told him, we have found the Messiah. When Jesus saw him, as he said, Simon, you son of John, you will be called Cephas. Peter's brother Andrew is the least known of the 4 disciples of the inner circle. Andrew ordinarily is left out of very much, and most of the time when you hear about Andrew, he's just an add-on to the background, a +1, if you will. Andrew ordinarily is there, but today we will learn how he was used by God. His story. Now, there's a man by the name of Homer Lindsay, referred to Andrew as the inviter, or as I see him, as the bringer or the introducer. Had Andrew never been born, the New Testament might not never have been wrote the way that it was. Peter may have never been introduced to Christ. Someone else would have preached the famous Pentecostal sermon in which thousands of people came down to give their life to Christ. We would have to eliminate 1st and 2nd Peter out of the Bible if Andrew never introduced his brother. Only heaven knows what else would have been left out of the Bible and of church history if Andrew, the insignificant one, had he not lived his story. Andrew was the first of all the disciples to be called. You'll find that in John, the 1st chapter, 35th and 40th verse. His eagerness to follow Christ combined him with his zeal for introducing others to Christ fairly exemplifies Andrew's character. You know, if we look, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, certainly Andrew was the least conspicuous. When we think about the great apostles, the great work they do, most of the time our mind does not go to Andrew. Oh, we think about Peter, James, and John. We think of the great works they did. We think about all their lives and how they lived it and how they were on the front lines. Scripture doesn't tell us about Andrew. He appears in the New Testament only 9 times, and most references simply mention him in passing. However, lest we forget, Andrew introduced Peter to Jesus. Stop that for a minute. Because most of the time we think, what difference can I make? Andrew introduced Peter to Jesus. You know, can you imagine what that would be like? You know, we forget Andrew. Andrew shows that he has the right heart for effective ministry. He stays in the background. Andrew's name means manly. He was a strong fisherman. His life proved him to be bold, decisive, and deliberate. He was driven a heartly passion for the truth, and he was willing to subject himself to the most extreme kinds of hardship. Andrew's personal encounter with Jesus took place a few months after Jesus' baptism. You'll find that in John, the first chapter, 29th and 34th verse. Andrew and John were standing next to John the Baptist when Jesus walked by. And John the Baptist said these words, "Behold, the Lamb of God." Andrew and John became Jesus' first disciples. The news Andrew heard was too good to keep to himself. So he went and found the one person in the world that he loved the most. Think about that. The person that probably introduced you to Christ had a deep love for you in their heart. You are part of their story. That's amazing, isn't it? That somebody thought enough of you to say, hey, let me introduce you to Jesus. Isn't that great? Just think where you'd be had that not happened. The news Andrew found was too good. So he went and found the one person whom he wanted to know Jesus. So what did Andrew do? There's 3 things we're going to look at this morning that Andrew did. The very first thing we saw was this. He saw the value of individual people. You know, when we think about the Bible, we read it cover to cover. There's certain verses that stick out to us. There's certain verses that people call as life verses. There's certain things that brings us, that catches our attention. Out of the whole Bible, there's one word that really sticks out in my mind. That word is whosoever. Your story, if your story is kind of like mine, there was a time you weren't saved. There was a time you lived your life however you wanted. You didn't have time for that. You just lived however, and you just lived free and wild. But then when you read that verse, whosoever, when you realize, not in your head, but in your heart, that Jesus died on the cross for that whosoever. You put your name in there. When I look at that word, I think Jesus died on the cross for Bobby Campbell. Man, I tell you, I was not worth it. Not worth it at all. But he loved me even though I was a sinner. That's what I'm saying. It just comes out, and you know, that's what Andrew appreciated, the value of a single soul. One person meant a lot to Andrew. That one person that he loved so. Next week we're going to look at the focus of one. But you know, that one thing, he was known for bringing individuals, not crowds, to Christ. Almost every time we see him in the gospel accounts, he's bringing someone to Jesus. He brought Peter to Jesus, just one. He brought the boy with his lunch to Jesus. Andrew has been referred to as the first home missionary because of the Jewish people he had brought to Jesus. Andrew later has been referred to as the first foreign missionary because of the Greeks that he had brought to Jesus. You know, most people don't come to Christ in an intermediate response to a sermon, in a crowd of people. They usually don't do that. They come to Christ because of the influence of one individual. Andrew brought one. And that one was Peter. And as we study the Bible about Peter, we see Peter had brought literally thousands. Can you imagine what that would be like? As Peter stood up there that day at Pentecost, and thousands of people stormed up there to accept Christ as Savior. That would almost make a person nervous, wouldn't it? But stop to think about this. Andrew brought Peter. Peter brought thousands. All of the fruit, all of the people of Peter's ministry is ultimately because Andrew loved him so much, he brought him to Christ. That's just astonishing. Few have ever heard of the name of Edward Kimball. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher. He was a Sunday school teacher who led D.L. Moody to Christ. Edward went to a Boston shoe store where the 18-year-old Moody was working, cornered him in the stockroom, and introduced him to Christ. Kimball was anything but bold. He was a timid, soft-spoken man. He went to the store frightened, trembling, and unaware of whether he had the courage to confront this young man with the gospel or not. Moody, on the other hand, was cruel and obviously illiterate. Kimball trembled in his boots as he recalled the incident. Moody had begun to attend Sunday school class. Moody was totally untaught, ignorant about the Bible. Kimball said, I decided to speak to Moody about Christ and about his soul. I started down to Holton's shoe store. I was nearly there. I began to wonder whether I ought to just go back. And although I may be on a mission, might embarrass the boy. And I went the other way, and the clerks might also want to know who I was. And as I was trying to make a good boy out of him, when I was pondering over all of this, I walked right by the store, not even noticing him. He said later, I couldn't even remember what I said. He said, I started to just not go back. He said, I started looking as a sign for God that it just wasn't the day. While he was pondering all of that, and then when I found out I had gone by the door, I determined to make a dash for it and to have it over at once. Kimball found Moody in the stockroom and spoke with him with limping words. Later he said, I could never remember what I said. Something about Christ and his love is all I could remember. He admitted that it was a weak appeal. But Moody then and there gave his heart to Christ. That one part of his story. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with D.L. Moody or not, but a couple of facts about D.L. Moody. Tens of thousands testified they came to Christ under Moody's ministry. Moody led C.T. Studd, the great pioneer missionary, and William Chapman, who himself became a well-known evangelist to Christ. D.L. Moody founded the Moody Bible Institute that has trained thousands and thousands for ministry. D.L. Moody passed away in 1899. But you know what? Friday at 2:30, I listened to the story from Moody Bible Institute. It comes on McKenzie radio station. They have stories to back it up. 1899, year 2024, he is still influencing people. One person, one insignificant, illiterate young boy. We all have a story to tell. The second thing that we see is this. He saw the value of insignificant gifts. Some people see the big picture more clearly just because they appreciate the value of small things. Excuse me. But I always say it's the little things in life that get our attention. If you don't believe me, you just walk across the dark room if you've got kids and step on a jack or a Lego or a little stick figure laying on the floor. It's the little things in life. We forget how important light is, don't we? Some people see the big picture, but Andrew saw the little. In the feeding of the 5,000, Philip's vision was overwhelmed by the size of the need. It tells us in John, the 6th chapter, the 8th and the 9th verse, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But then it ends with this. But what are they for so many? No gift is insignificant for the hands of Jesus. We find in Luke, the 21st chapter, the first 4 verses, that he looked up and saw the rich dropping their offering into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow dropping only 2 tiny coins. And Jesus says the words, this, truly I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all these people have put in gifts out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on. We look at that and we fail to see the importance of the little things that we do. A card, a letter, a simple thing of cookies, brownies, maybe. Makes all the difference in the world. The little things. When you lose a loved one, most time you don't remember the big, great, big, gracious things, but you remember the little things. The people that cried on your shoulder, the people that did this, the people that did that. Not great things. You remember the little things. No gift is insignificant. God's ability to use a gift is in no way hindered or enhanced by the size of that gift. It is a sacrificial faithfulness of the giver, not the size of the gift. It's the true measure of the gift's significance. It's not the greatness of the gift that counts, but rather the greatness of God. The miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 illustrates the way God works. He takes the sacrificial and often seemingly insignificant gifts of people who give faithfully, and he multiplies them to accomplish monumental things. You remember the story of the 5,000, the kid with the 2 fish, the 5 barley loaves. Jesus took it and blessed it, and he set it out, all those people sitting around there.